Jack Vance had spent 17 years learning how to fade into violence and walk out the other side like it was just another Tuesday. The Green Berets, the Army's premier special operations force, never advertised their work in places most folks couldn't spot on a globe. Jack didn't either. He retired to Oak Haven, Texas at 42 with a busted left shoulder, a map of scars he kept quiet about, and a 15-year-old son named Sam. By all accounts, Sam was everything Jack had silently prayed the boy would turn out to be. Sharp, decent, and tough to rattle. Sam's mom, Claire Vance, had passed away from an aneurysm when the boy was just 9. No warning signs, no long sickness. She was pouring coffee one morning and gone by the afternoon. It was the absolute only thing Jack had ever faced that his tactical training gave him no playbook for. He simply had to learn how to be both parents. He figured out how to sit through middle school science fairs, grill a decent steak, and remember to leave the porch light on. He wasn't a naturally warm guy, but he was a fiercely honest one, and Sam always understood the difference. Oak Haven was a quintessential Texas town where certain old money families hovered entirely above consequence. At the high school level, those particular families had sons playing varsity football. Coach Rex Ford had spent 12 years turning the program into a state powerhouse, 4 championship rings, a massive trophy case, and a culture of blind impunity so thick it practically had its own gravitational pull. The 6 starting linebackers who anchored Ford's defense were the sons of men who sat on the city council, ran the county's largest oil rigs, and controlled the local zoning boards. Ty Brooks's dad was a vocal city councilman. Chase Cole's father owned half the commercial real estate downtown. Luke Hayes's old man sat directly on the school board. These 6 kids had learned from watching their fathers that real power meant you dictated the rules while everyone else just followed them. Sam Vance, quiet, sharply observant, the new kid whose dad worked freelance security and didn't rub elbows at the country club, was not in their elite tax bracket. And those boys had decided right around mid-October that Sam needed to be taught that lesson up close. What Sam had done 3 weeks prior to the ambush was write a formal letter. He had noticed things in the locker room that rubbed him the wrong way. Used syringes tossed in the corner trash cans, sudden and explosive muscle mass gains, the volatile mood swings that sparked most of the team's hallway brawls. Sam had typed up a detailed, highly specific, carefully drafted letter to athletic director Greg Pierce, explicitly naming what he'd seen and requesting a formal inquiry. Pierce had done exactly what cowardly men do: absolutely nothing, except hand it straight over to Rex Ford. The coach then passed that same letter to Ty Brooks, without needing to utter a single word of instruction. Jack was out back fixing a loose deck board on a Thursday night when his phone buzzed. The caller ID showed the high school's main office, but the voice belonged to a teacher, Miss Sarah Lane, who taught Sam's junior history class. She was breathing in that shallow, tight way of a person desperately fighting back tears in front of a parent. "Mr. Vance, I'm incredibly sorry to be calling you like this." Sam was leaving the field house, the south parking lot. 6 boys from the defense. I saw the whole thing from my classroom window. I already dialed 911. The ambulance is rushing him to Mercy General. Jack set his drill down on the cedar planks with deliberate care. How bad? A heavy pause on the line. He was awake when they loaded him in. But, Mr. Vance, they didn't stop hitting him even after he went down. Jack was strapped into his Chevy Silverado in under 45 seconds. Mercy General's intensive care unit reeked of harsh industrial bleach and stale recycled air. Dr. Ann Park, the lead attending, met him right at the nurse's station. She spoke with the flat, clinical kindness of a professional who had delivered terrible news 1,000 times but never lost her empathy. Collapsed lung, 4 shattered ribs, a severely bruised kidney. They had him stabilized, but the kid was going to be stuck there for a week at minimum, maybe 2. She escorted Jack down the hall to the room. Sam was hooked up to monitors and IV drips, looking heartbreakingly small inside that sterile hospital gown. His face was mostly untouched. The boys had strictly targeted his torso, his ribs, his organs, the exact spots that would cause agonizing pain for months without showing up in a school yearbook photo. Sam's eyes fluttered open when Jack dragged a plastic chair to the bedside. He tried to mumble something. "Don't," Jack said softly. He rested his large, rough hand gently over Sam's. I'm right here. Just rest. He stayed planted in that chair for 4 solid hours without flinching. His expression was a stone wall. The nurses walking past the glass window noticed that the man never shed a tear, never raised his voice, never dialed a lawyer. He just sat completely motionless, like an engine quietly idling, waiting for the green light to shift into gear. At dawn the next morning, Jack pulled into Oakhaven High, right before the first warning bell, and asked the front desk clerk to see Principal Beth Ward. He had on a clean denim shirt, faded Wranglers, and scuffed work boots. His hands were entirely empty. They led him down the administrative wing to her office, a massive, carpeted space, decorated with shiny district awards and a framed degree from Texas A&M mounted behind her heavy oak desk. Ward was a woman in her late 50s, her highlighted blonde hair styled back. She wore the fiercely composed expression of a seasoned administrator who had successfully managed irate parents for 2 decades and viewed it as her absolute best skill. She motioned to the leather guest chair before Jack could even open his mouth. "Mr. Vance, I heard the awful news about Sam, and I am deeply sorry. I need you to know we treat every single altercation with the utmost severity. 6 of your football players put my boy in intensive care last night," Jack stated. His tone was perfectly flat, completely devoid of heat. "Punctured lung." She intertwined her manicured fingers on the desk blotter. "I completely understand how distressing this is. We are actively gathering all the facts, and I want to assure you we won't rush to any final judgments until the proper disciplinary process is complete." "I'm not asking about your process," Jack replied. "I'm asking what you plan to actually do." Ward leaned back in her high-backed chair. Her face shifted gears, instantly dropping the warm sympathy to adopt a cold, risk management posture. "Mr. Vance, I've interviewed several students who were hanging around the lot. There is some debate about what actually sparked the fight. Sam was apparently seen having words with the defense earlier this week." She paused, ensuring the ugly implication landed perfectly. He might have provoked a situation he wasn't prepared to handle. Jack didn't blink. "I realize that is a bitter pill to swallow," she pressed on. "But 6 teenagers don't just jump a classmate in a vacuum. We are required to evaluate the entire landscape." She tilted her chin down, offering the patronizing, practiced patience of someone used to having the last word. "What exactly do you want me to do here, Mr. Vance? Call the National Guard?" Jack smiled. It was a faint, remarkably genuine smile, the exact kind a man shows when someone perfectly confirms the disappointing truth he already knew. He stood up slowly, gave a single nod, and walked out the door. Out in the main corridor, just before he hit the double exit doors, a classroom swung open. "Miss." Lane darted out into the hall, checking both directions nervously before speaking in a hushed, frantic whisper. "Mr. Vance. I got the whole thing on my phone camera. From the second floor." Ty Brooks orchestrated the whole thing. He had his guys positioned at both exits of the lot before Sam even walked out of the building. It was a pure ambush. She stared at the linoleum. "I'm terrified to take it to the superintendent. Hayes's dad is the board president." Jack studied her frightened eyes for a beat. "Keep that file locked down. Don't show a soul yet," he told her. "Can you do that?" "Yes," she breathed. "Good." He turned toward the parking lot. "I'll let you know when." What Principal Ward completely missed, what the Brooks family couldn't comprehend, and what Coach Rex Ford never once stopped to calculate, was the highly specialized nature of what Jack Vance had been doing for those 17 years. Green Berets operate in tiny, lethal elements, deep behind hostile lines. Direct assaults, strategic reconnaissance, unconventional warfare. You simply don't survive in that shadowy environment unless you cultivate a razor-sharp operational intelligence. It's not just about pulling triggers, it's about possessing the chilling patience to dissect a target from every angle before you strike. Understanding every single exit route, mapping every unpredictable variable, tracking every breathing soul in the operational theater. Jack had drawn up mission parameters in remote valleys, where a fractional miscalculation meant helicopters fell out of the sky and good men came home in draped boxes. He aimed that exact same clinical methodology at Oakhaven now. He had the unhurried, ice-cold focus of a man who had already locked in the final outcome and was merely executing the necessary steps in order. He spent his entire first day doing nothing but gathering intel. He had all 6 linebackers ID'd within 2 hours. Ty Brooks, Chase Cole, Luke Hayes, Mark Penn, Seth Dunn, Troy Reed. He mapped their daily commutes, their favorite off-campus hangouts, the specific locations where they let their guard down. Brooks, acting as the alpha, was the easiest to track. He strutted through the local BBQ joint on Highway 6 every afternoon, holding court in the back booth like a newly crowned king. On day 2, Jack drove down to AD Greg Pierce's office at the county athletic complex. Pierce was a soft, doughy guy in his early 50s who started sweating through his polo shirt the split second Jack calmly stated his name. That physiological reaction gave Jack all the leverage he needed. He pressed the man gently. No yelling, no direct physical threats. Within 8 minutes, Pierce's nervous sweating morphed into a stammering, full-blown confession. He admitted handing Sam's whistleblower letter to Ford. He admitted knowing the retaliation was coming. He kept his mouth shut because Ford was drinking buddies with the school board, and Pierce desperately wanted to secure his upcoming district pension. He even started sobbing. Jack captured the entire pathetic breakdown on his phone's voice memo app. He walked out and drove straight back to the high school's south parking lot, where he burned 20 minutes memorizing the blind spots of the exterior security cameras. There were 4 main lenses. 3 provided a wide-angle sweep of the asphalt, but the 4th, the one aimed at the loading dock where the ambush began, had been physically wrenched sideways on its metal bracket, forced to record nothing but a brick wall. Jack pulled up the district's public maintenance logs on his laptop. The camera had been facing the brick wall since October 3rd, exactly 3 days before they jumped Sam. Someone had orchestrated this hit with care. Just not enough care. On the 3rd night, Ty Brooks walked into the ER at Mercy General, the exact same hospital where Sam was still hooked to a breathing machine. Ty was sporting a shattered orbital socket and 3 snapped fingers on his dominant right hand. He told the skeptical triage nurse he took a bad tumble down a steep flight of concrete stairs. Nobody pushed him on the glaring inconsistencies because his cover story was rehearsed, and while the injuries were excruciating, they wouldn't kill him. Chase Cole didn't fall down any stairs. Chase was discovered by his frantic mother at 11 p.m., locked inside the cab of his Ford phone, 150 inches their own driveway. He was trembling violently, entirely unable to explain the raw, red zip-tie grooves cut into his wrists. He claimed a total blackout of the previous 3 hours. When pressed, he devolved into a hyperventilating panic attack and refused to say another word. Luke Hayes and Mark Penn both limped into a county urgent care center on the 4th day. Much like Ty, they offered incredibly vague explanations for their severe contusions and were patched up without any police involvement. Seth Dunn quit going to class entirely. Troy Reed texted his mom from under his bed covers at 9 in the morning on day 5, whispering that he felt sick and was skipping afternoon practice. His mother, who had seen the sheer, unadulterated terror swimming in her son's eyes since Tuesday, didn't dare argue. Not a single one of them dialed 911. Not one of the 6 tough guys, nor their affluent parents, filed a police report. They stayed dead silent, either because they had absolutely no clue who the ghost was that was picking them apart in the dark, or because, deep down in their terrified guts, they knew exactly who it was. Coach Rex Ford vanished without a trace on day 4. His lifted silver Dodge Ram, sporting a massive team decal on the back glass, was discovered idling out by the eastern oil derricks. The keys were still swinging in the ignition. His Yeti tumbler was still full of lukewarm black coffee. Detective Ray Cruz of the Oak Haven PD caught the missing persons dispatch. Cruz was 45, an ex-Army Ranger, a meticulous investigator who had bumped into Jack at a VFW charity drive a couple of years back. Cruz had instantly formed a quiet, highly accurate assessment of the specific breed of predator Jack Vance was. Ford finally stumbled back into civilization 48 hours later, wandering out of the scrub-brush desert roughly 20 miles past the county line. Not a single scratch on his body. Yet, he was fundamentally, psychologically hollowed out, a mere shell of the arrogant man who had parked at those oil fields. He sat in a frigid interrogation room at the precinct, heavily flanked by a high-priced lawyer, and completely refused to articulate what had transpired out in the heat. Ford emailed his official resignation to the district at dawn. The PDF contained 0 explanations. Detective Cruz cruised his unmarked sedan over to Jack's property that same afternoon. He parked in the gravel drive, let the engine tick for a minute, and knocked on the screen door. Jack opened it holding a steaming mug of black coffee, looking for all the world like a relaxed suburban dad who'd just finished the Sunday crossword. "Hear the news about the head coach?" Cruz asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Caught it on the local broadcast," Jack replied evenly. Cruz stared hard into Jack's eyes for a long, heavy minute. "You got anything you feel like sharing with me, Jack?" "Nothing comes to mind." Jack took a slow sip of his coffee. "Sam's getting taken off the ventilator tomorrow. Docs think he might be cleared to come home next week." Cruz gave a slow, deliberate nod. He turned around, walked straight back to his cruiser, and never typed up a single field report regarding the visit. The six fathers convened for a war council on Saturday morning at the Brooks estate. Hal Brooks, a thick-necked, volatile man, who operated under the delusion that there wasn't a problem on Earth his checkbook couldn't fix, ran the meeting. Their golden boy sons were either battered or barricaded in their bedrooms. The head coach had fled. No arrests had been made. The desperate narrative they spun for themselves was that some unknown gang had done this, and the immediate solution was applying massive local pressure. Hal Brooks played golf with the chief of police. Principal Ward would bend the knee. They had leverage. They collectively agreed to march over to the Vance property. 6 powerful men. They were going to make this nobody understand the sheer gravity of the hornet's nest he'd kicked. They rolled up just as the Texas sun dipped below the horizon. Jack opened the front door before they even made it to the porch. He stepped outside, letting the screen door slap shut behind him, and stood on the top wooden step, gazing down at the impromptu lynch mob. All 6 fathers fanned out in a tactical half-circle, totally blocking the driveway. Hal Brooks stood dead center, arms folded tight across his chest, radiating every ounce of civic dominance he'd spent 2 decades amassing. "You honestly think you can brutalize our boys and just walk away clean?" Hal growled. His baritone voice carried the blind, unwavering arrogance of a man who had never suffered a genuine consequence in his life. The other 5 men subtly shifted their weight, instinctively flanking their leader. Jack smiled. It was the exact same chilling smile he had given the principal. That's when they finally noticed what Jack was holding. It was a smartphone, screen rotated outward, glowing brightly against the twilight, playing a high-definition video. The first file was Miss Lane's window footage. The south parking lot, the ambush laid bare in stark color. 2 linebackers already crouched behind the dumpsters. Ty Brooks standing perfectly still in the center of the asphalt, cracking his knuckles, waiting before Sam had even pushed open the gym doors. It wasn't a spontaneous scuffle. It was a cold-blooded, choreographed assault by 6 massive athletes on a solitary target. Hal's jaw locked. That doesn't prove Jack simply swiped his thumb. The second file was the audio from Greg Pierce's office. The athletic director's voice unmistakable and openly weeping, confessing that Sam had filed a safety report regarding steroid abuse. Admitting he handed that exact report to Ford, knowing the team would retaliate, choosing to protect his own lucrative pension over a child's life. The digital recording was crystal clear, perfectly time-stamped. One of the fathers let out a choked gasp. Jack swiped his thumb a 3rd time. The 3rd file wasn't media. It was a heavily encrypted PDF, a meticulously formatted tactical intelligence dossier. It was the exact style of target package Jack had drafted for JSOC for 17 years. Only instead of tracking foreign cartel bosses, the high-value targets were the 6 wealthy men standing on his lawn. Hal Brooks. 4 documented instances of steering lucrative city zoning contracts to shell companies he secretly owned, fully cross-referenced with hidden state tax filings. Chase Cole's father. A blatant history of falsified construction payrolls flagged by an internal federal audit a year ago but mysteriously buried. Luke Hayes' dad. Massive embezzlement of public school board funds, concealed across 3 shell accounts. The list went on. Every father had his own dedicated page. Every page cited bulletproof financial sources. Every document was preloaded into an email addressed to the Texas Attorney General, the Houston Chronicle, and for 2 of the men, the regional director of the FBI. The draft was fully queued. The only thing keeping them out of federal prison was Jack's thumb hovering a millimeter above the send icon. The twilight suddenly felt suffocatingly quiet. A few houses down, An automated lawn sprinkler rhythmically ticked back and forth across the grass. Hal Brooks, city councilman, real estate tycoon, the man who assumed he owned the universe, was the very first to mentally process the apocalypse staring back at him. The arrogant flush of blood drained right out of his cheeks, leaving him looking like a chalk outline. "Your son's put my boy in a hospital bed," Jack stated. His vocal register hadn't elevated a single decibel since he walked outside. It was flat, mechanical, the voice of a man reading a weather report. They nearly killed him because he filed a legitimate complaint that threatened their football dynasty. That makes the assault deeply premeditated and purely retaliatory. Your kids knew exactly what they were doing. And looking at the men who raised them, I know exactly where they learned it. Nobody dared breathe. "I am going to offer you one single exit strategy," Jack continued. "Sitting on my kitchen island are 6 legally binding sworn statements, one for each of your boys, detailing their exact roles in the felony assault, ready to be handed to the district attorney. These documents are ironclad. They will immediately terminate 6 promising college athletic careers and incinerate every single Division I scholarship currently on the table." He let the devastation sink into their bones. "You walk inside and sign the parental consent waivers confirming you won't contest the DA's charges, and the files on this phone stay buried forever. Every audio clip, every tax record, every federal felony permanently sealed." Hal opened his mouth to negotiate. Jack lightly tapped the screen, waking up the queued email draft. Hal snapped his mouth shut. "Or," Jack said softly, "I tap this glass in the next 10 seconds, and you spend the next 10 years trying to explain your fraudulent bank accounts to a federal judge who doesn't give a damn about high school football." Jack locked eyes with the councilman. Hal stared back at him for a long, agonizing eternity. He finally truly saw what was standing on that wooden porch. Not a weeping father, not a grieving victim, not a local annoyance to be bribed or bullied. He was staring at a flawlessly calibrated weapon that had already won the war before the first shot was fired. Hal lowered his eyes to the dirt. "Get the paperwork," he rasped. "We'll sign." Jack had a licensed state notary, Jane Ross, a retired legal clerk who owed him a massive favor, waiting quietly at his kitchen table. She processed the 6 waivers without a hint of emotion, slammed her official ink stamp onto every signature line, and walked out the back door. 48 hours later, Miss Lane marched into the district superintendent's office and dropped her video file, alongside a formal written complaint. She wasn't standing alone this time. AD Greg Pierce, suddenly experiencing a miraculous, terror-induced moral awakening, submitted a devastating corroborating affidavit that same afternoon. Principal Ward was escorted off campus on indefinite administrative leave by Friday. Pierce's contract was instantly voided. The school board, minus Luke Hayes' father, who had abruptly resigned citing health reasons, voted unanimously to fully cooperate with the Texas Rangers' sprawling criminal probe into the athletic department. Rex Ford never showed his face in Oak Haven again. The entire varsity football season was canceled, pending a state-level audit. Detective Cruz read the explosive indictments over his morning coffee and kept his mouth firmly shut. Sam finally came home on a breezy Thursday afternoon. He walked through the front door under his own power, moving with stiff caution, constantly favoring his left side where his ribs had knitted back together awkwardly. The trauma surgeon had noted, in a purely clinical tone, that the ache would likely flare up every time a cold front blew into Texas for the rest of his life. Jack had spent the morning deep cleaning the house, packing the fridge with groceries, and putting fresh, crisp sheets on Sam's bed. Acts of quiet, relentless service were the only love language Jack had ever truly mastered. Later that evening, they sat out on the back patio, soaking up the fading October sunset. Sam had a heavy wool blanket draped over his lap. Jack was nursing a mug of dark roast. The neighborhood hummed with its typical suburban soundtrack. A couple of kids shouting down the block. A stray dog barking at a fence and giving up. The automated sprinklers next door sparking to life at precisely 6 o'clock. "The guys who jumped me," Sam murmured. "What happened to them?" Jack stared out at the tree line. "They're being processed through the county prosecutor's office. The felony charges are airtight. Every single one of their university scholarships got pulled yesterday." He took a slow sip from his mug. The coach skipped town. "The principal is finished." Sam sat quietly for a long beat. "That's not what I'm asking, Dad." Jack didn't turn his head. "I know. The silence stretched out between them. Sam shifted his weight, wincing slightly as he adjusted the blanket over his bruised ribs. "Are you okay?" Sam asked. It was a deeply profound question, the rare kind a 15-year-old only asks when he's probing at something vast and unspoken. Jack actually turned the thought over in his mind, analyzing it for the absolute truth. "Yeah," Jack said softly. "I really am." Sam nodded, turning his gaze back out toward the fading yard. He didn't push for details. He had grown up watching his father operate, and over the years, the boy had learned to read the intricate, subtle frequencies of his dad's silence. This wasn't the rigid, tightly coiled silence from the days right after the attack, the dangerous tension Sam had felt without fully comprehending. This was entirely different. This was a loose, unburdened quiet. The profound stillness of a man who had finally set down a massive, crushing weight he'd been carrying since that terrible phone call. Down the asphalt, a neighbor's kid launched his bike off a plywood ramp, wiped out into the soft grass, and immediately erupted into laughter. The sprinkler ticked like a metronome. The sky bled from fiery orange to a bruised purple, and finally faded to black. They sat together on the patio, completely at peace, until the darkness fully swallowed the town.